18 years ago, John F. Kennedy Jr. hired an executive assistant named Rosemarie Terenzio. She quickly became his publicist and one of his closest confidants right up until his death in 1999.
Now she's telling their story in a new book, Fairy Tale Interrupted, a memoir of life, love, and loss. And Rosemarie Terenzio is with us this morning. Good morning.
Hi.
Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So what motivated you to write about your relationship after all this time?
Well, I think a few things. One was that I would tell stories about the first thing people would ask me when they found out that I had worked for him was, how did you get that job? And when I told the story, they would, such a great story, that's such a great story. So there was that. And then I was interviewed in 2009 about John's charity. It was the 20-year anniversary of his charity. And people started asking me again about what was it like to work there, what was George like? You know, where were you from? How did you meet him? You know, and so people started approaching me again about a book. And I felt like enough time had passed that I could write my fairy tale interrupted and not theirs.
And if this is a fairy tale interrupted, I think the fairy tale is Cinderella.
Yeah,
I mean, it's largely the story of a girl from the Bronx who finds herself from a blue-collar family, who finds herself next to the world's most glamorous figure, arguably.
Yes, yes. And it takes you through sort of a bit of my childhood, and then the job, and then obviously what happens, and what I do after. How do you come back from that? Who do you work for after JFK Jr.? There aren't many people in the world that are as famous as he was.
So tell us how you did come to work for him and how your relationship sort of evolved to the point where he was really taking you into his inner circle, and his wife, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, did too.
They took me under their wing, and they were very good to me. I was working at a small boutique PR firm here in New York. My boss was Michael Berman, and John started coming into the office, and we couldn't kind of figure out why, and Michael was very, you know, kind of tight-lipped about it. So one morning I came in on a Monday morning, and my office, which I loved, which was big and great and had a window, my office was being packed up, and it was him. And I said, "Excuse me, what are you doing, and why are you touching my stuff?" And he looked at me like flabbergasted, and he was like, "Oh, hi."
And his magazine was moving into your face.
Yeah, and I didn't know that at the time. And I turned to look, and I'm looking at this box on the ground, and there's my Howard Stern headshot ripped. When he took it off my billboard, he ripped it.
And you knew who he was, you knew his whole background.
But I grew up in a Republican family, and he wasn't a political, he was a political type. He wasn't he was a handsome man, but he wasn't really in my orbit. So, you know, I was more like the girl, you know, in my 20s, I wanted the rock and roll guy.
But what was the thing about your relationship with him, your professional relationship, which he seemed to appreciate the idea that you had very little hesitation, in fact, a leaning to give him, that's not a TV word, guff.
Yeah, I mean, I told it like it was. I always did, and I do now. So I think he loved that because I didn't have the same idea of his fame that other people had. He was just there, and I saw no reason not to tell him exactly how I felt.
And you actually saw their marriage up close, and I think that the impression that people had was that they were fighting a lot towards the end, and there was all this tension, but you didn't really see it that way.
No, I mean, they were just like every other couple, ups and downs, but theirs was played out in public. I mean, if you saw some of my parents' fights, they were worse than theirs.
Right.
Where would he be now, 18 years later? Would he be President Kennedy? Would he be Senator Kennedy? Would he be running George?
I could never predict. I know that he talked about it, and it was something that, you know, he thought about, but he would never move to the next thing until George was a success.
You think you'd still be working with him today?
Oh, I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah, well, Rosemarie Terenzio, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about the book. We really appreciate it.